The woman collapsed just as her frozen fingers brushed against the wooden gate, her body crumpling into the snow like a rag doll whose strings had been cut all at once. Rhett Vaughn had been mending fence posts near the barn when he heard the soft thump, barely audible over the howling wind that tore across his Kansas property. It was January 1876, and this winter had proven itself the cruelest he had seen in his 26 years. The blizzard had rolled in 3 days prior, transforming the landscape around Concordia into an endless expanse of white that swallowed everything in its path. He squinted through the driving snow, his hand automatically reaching for the rifle he kept close during these uncertain times, but something made him pause. The shape at his gate was too small, too still. Rhett ran, his boots crunching through the knee-deep drifts, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air. When he reached the gate, his heart seized. A woman lay face down in the snow, her dark hair splayed around her head like ink spilled on paper. Her lips had taken on a bluish tint, and her skin was pale as the snow itself. He did not hesitate. In one smooth motion, he scooped her into his arms, surprised by how light she felt, how fragile. Her head lolled against his chest as he kicked open the gate and strode toward his cabin, moving as fast as the deep snow would allow. The warmth of his home hit him like a wall when he shouldered through the door. The fire he had built that morning still crackled in the hearth, casting dancing shadows across the rough-hewn walls. Rhett carried the woman straight to his bed, the only bed in the single-room cabin, and laid her down as gently as he could manage with his half-frozen fingers. Her clothes were soaked through, ice crystals clinging to the fabric of her worn wool coat. He knew he had to work fast. Frostbite and hypothermia were silent killers, and he had seen men twice her size succumb to far less exposure than she had clearly endured. Rhett pulled off her frozen boots, wincing at how thin the soles were, completely inadequate for a Kansas winter. Her stockings were torn and wet. He peeled them away carefully, checking her toes for signs of blackening flesh. They were pale and cold as marble, but still pink enough to give him hope. Her coat came next, then her dress, his movements clinical and efficient despite the awkwardness of undressing an unconscious woman he had never met. He averted his eyes as much as possible, focusing on the task of survival rather than propriety. He wrapped her in every blanket he owned, piling them on top of her until only her face showed, then positioned her as close to the fire as he dared without risking burns. Rhett knelt beside the bed, studying her face for the first time. She was beautiful, even with her lips tinged blue and her skin colorless. She could not have been more than 22 or 23, he guessed. Dark lashes rested against her cheeks, and even unconscious, there was something determined about the set of her jaw. Who was she? What had driven her out into this deadly storm? He fetched warm water and clean cloths, carefully washing her hands and feet, trying to restore circulation. The medical books he had taught himself to read said this was the way gentle warmth gradually applied. He had learned the hard way after his father had passed 5 years ago that out here, 60 miles from the nearest proper doctor, a man needed to know how to handle most things himself. Time lost meaning as he worked. He heated water, pressed warm compresses to her skin, checked her breathing every few minutes. The storm continued to rage outside, the wind screaming around the corners of the cabin like tortured spirits. Snow piled against the windows, creating a strange, muffled quality to the world. They were completely cut off, just the two of them in this small, warm space while the blizzard tried to tear itself apart around them. It was nearly 2 hours before she stirred. Rhett was changing the compress on her forehead when her eyelids fluttered. He leaned closer, his hand instinctively moving to her shoulder. "Easy now," he said softly. "You are safe." Her eyes opened slowly, revealing irises the color of spring violets. For a moment she simply stared at him, confusion clouding her features. Then awareness flooded back and she tried to sit up, panic overtaking her expression. "Please do not move too quickly," Rhett said, gently pressing her back against the pillows. "You nearly froze to death. Your body needs time to recover." She looked down at herself, at the pile of blankets cocooning her, and a flush of color finally rose to her cheeks. "My clothes," she whispered, her voice hoarse and raw, "were soaked through. I hung them by the fire to dry. I am sorry for the impropriety, but it was necessary. You would have died otherwise." He stood and moved to the table, giving her space, trying to make his large frame less imposing. "I am Rhett Vaughn. This is my property about 3 miles north of Concordia." She pulled the blankets tighter around herself, her eyes darting around the cabin, taking in her surroundings. He could see her mind working, assessing the situation, determining if she was in danger of a different kind now. He understood. A woman alone with a strange man in the middle of nowhere had every reason to be cautious. "I am Victoria," she said finally. "Victoria Thornton. I was trying to reach town." "From where?" Rhett asked, incredulous. "There is nothing but open prairie for miles in most directions." Her jaw tightened, that determined look he had noticed earlier becoming more pronounced. "From my uncle's homestead. 8 miles southeast. You walked 8 miles in this blizzard." He could not keep the shock from his voice. "What would possess you to attempt something so dangerous?" Victoria looked away, her fingers twisting in the blanket. "I had no choice." The weight in those 4 words told Rhett there was a story there, and not a pleasant one. He had lived on the frontier long enough to know that women rarely found themselves in such desperate circumstances unless they were running from something. Or someone. He decided not to push. Instead, he ladled soup from the pot that hung perpetually over his fire into a wooden bowl and brought it to her. "You need to eat. Build your strength back up." She accepted the bowl with trembling hands, and he noticed the bruises on her wrists as the blanket fell back slightly. Old bruises, yellowing at the edges and newer purple ones overlapping them. His jaw clenched, but he said nothing. Again, he had seen enough of frontier life to read the signs. Victoria ate slowly, and he could see it taking effort. The soup was simple, just venison and vegetables, but she consumed it as though it was the finest meal in Kansas. When she finished, she handed the bowl back to him with a quiet thank you. "You should rest more," Rhett said. "That storm is not going to let up any time soon, and even if it did, you are in no condition to go anywhere." "I cannot stay here," Victoria said, but even as she spoke, exhaustion weighed down her words. "It is not proper. If anyone found out, my reputation would be ruined." "Your reputation would not matter much if you were dead," Rhett replied, more harshly than he intended. He softened his tone. "Miss Thornton, look outside. We are in the middle of a blizzard." "Even if propriety were not already compromised, which I would argue it was the moment you set foot on the frozen prairie alone, there is nowhere for you to go right now. The snow is hip-deep and getting deeper. The temperature is dropping further as night comes. You would not make it 100 yards." She knew he was right. He could see it in her eyes, the resignation mixed with fear. Not fear of him, he thought, but fear of what staying meant, what it would cost her when this was all over. "I will not harm you," he said quietly, meeting her gaze directly. "You have my word. I will sleep by the fire. The bed is yours for as long as you need it." Victoria studied his face for a long moment, and he got the sense that she was good at reading people, that she had learned by necessity to see past words to the truth beneath. Whatever she saw in him must have satisfied her because she nodded slightly and laid back against the pillows. "Thank you," she whispered, For saving my life. Anyone would have done the same. No, she said, her eyes already closing. Not anyone. Within minutes, she was asleep again, her breathing deep and even. Rhett sat in his chair by the fire, watching her, questions spinning through his mind. He should have felt the burden of an unexpected guest, the complication of a woman in his home, but instead, he felt something else entirely. A sense of purpose, perhaps. Or maybe it was the simple human relief of not being alone for once. He had been solitary for so long now, ever since his father's death, that he had almost forgotten what it was like to have another person under his roof. The storm continued through the night and into the next day. Rhett woke stiff and sore from sleeping sitting up, but he did not complain. He added wood to the fire and started coffee, the familiar morning routine complicated now by the need to be quiet. Victoria still slept, and he was glad. Her body needed the rest to heal. He busied himself with small tasks, checking his stores of firewood, rationing out his food supplies to account for 2 people instead of 1, mending a shirt that had torn at the shoulder. All the while, he was aware of her presence, the soft sound of her breathing, the way she occasionally shifted under the blankets. She woke around midday, and this time there was no panic, just a quiet wariness. Rhett brought her more soup and a cup of water. "Your clothes are dry," he said, gesturing to where they hung. "I can step outside if you wish to dress. In this storm," she glanced toward the window where snow had drifted halfway up the glass, "you will freeze." "I will be fine for a few minutes. Please just turn around." "That will be sufficient." He did as she asked, facing the door, giving her privacy. He heard the rustle of fabric, small gasps of pain that she tried to muffle. Those bruises, he thought grimly. They were hurting her. "You can look now," she said after several minutes. He turned. She was dressed in her clothes from yesterday, a simple gray dress that had seen better days, mended in several places. She sat on the edge of the bed, trying to lace up her boots, but her fingers were still clumsy with lingering cold and damage. "May I help?" Rhett asked, gesturing to the boots. She hesitated, then nodded. He knelt in front of her, taking her foot gently and sliding it into the boot, then lacing it with quick, efficient movements. He repeated the process with the other foot, trying not to notice how close he was to her, the faint scent of lavender that clung to her hair despite everything she had been through. "Thank you," Victoria said when he finished. "You have been very kind." "You said you were coming from your uncle's homestead," Rhett said, standing and moving back to give her space. "Was he not worried about you leaving in the storm?" Her expression shuddered immediately, walls going up behind her eyes. "My uncle is not a worrying man. Does he know where you are?" "He knows I left. I doubt he cares where I ended up as long as it is far from him." There it was, confirmation of what he had suspected. Rhett felt anger kindle in his chest. "He hurt you." It was not a question, but Victoria answered anyway. "He is my only living relative. When my parents died of fever last summer, I had nowhere else to go. He took me in, but he made it clear that I was a burden, an extra mouth to feed in a house that could barely support his own family. He expected me to work like a field hand, and when I did not move fast enough or complained about anything, he had a heavy hand. And his wife, did she not intercede? My aunt died 3 years ago. It is just him and his 2 sons, both older than me." She looked down at her hands. "The sons take after their father." Rhett's fists clenched. He had known men like that, men who thought their strength gave them the right to dominate anyone weaker. It made his blood boil. "You cannot go back there," he said firmly. "I have no intention of returning. I was trying to reach Concordia. I have a small amount of money my mother left me, hidden where my uncle never found it. I thought perhaps I could find work, maybe as a seamstress or a cook. Anything would be better than staying there. 8 miles in a blizzard with no proper winter gear." Rhett shook his head. You nearly died for your freedom. Freedom is worth dying for. The quiet conviction in her voice made him believe she meant it absolutely. They fell into silence, the only sounds the crackling fire and the wind outside. The intimacy of their situation was not lost on Rhett. Here they were, two strangers, trapped together by circumstance and weather, sharing space and stories they might never have told under normal conditions. "What about you?" Victoria asked after a while. "Do you have family in Concordia?" "No family anywhere," Rhett replied. "My mother died when I was born. My father raised me alone until he passed 5 years ago. Heart gave out one day while he was working the fields. Since then, it has just been me." "That sounds lonely," he considered that. "It is, but it is also simple. I answer to no one, rely on no one. Out here, that is sometimes a blessing. But you helped me. You did not have to. I could not have lived with myself if I had not." He met her eyes. "Whatever else I am not the kind of man who leaves someone to die." The storm finally broke on the third day. Rhett woke to silence, the absence of wind so complete it felt almost wrong. Pale sunlight filtered through the windows, illuminating a world transformed. Snow had drifted into fantastic shapes, sculpting the landscape into something alien and beautiful. The sky was a brittle blue, the kind of blue that promised bone-chilling cold even in the brightest sunshine. Victoria was already awake, standing at the window, looking out at the endless white. "It is beautiful," she said softly, "and terrifying. To think I was out in that." "You are fortunate to be alive," Rhett said, coming to stand beside her. Not too close, but close enough that he could smell that lavender scent again. He wondered if it was soap she made herself or if it was just something essential to who she was. "Thanks to you." She turned to look at him, really look at him, and he felt the intensity of her gaze like a physical thing. "I owe you my life, Rhett Vaughn. You owe me nothing, but I have a proposition for you if you are willing to hear it." Wariness crept back into her expression. "What kind of proposition?" "The practical kind," he assured her. "You need work and a place to stay. I have both to offer. This ranch is more than one man can handle alone. I could use help with cooking, mending, general housekeeping. The work is hard, but I would pay you fair wages and you would have a roof over your head." "People would talk," Victoria said immediately. "An unmarried woman living with an unmarried man. Let them talk. We know the truth of it, that this is a business arrangement. Besides, the nearest neighbor is 5 miles away. We could go weeks without seeing another soul." She bit her lip, considering. He could see her weighing her limited options. She could try to make it to Concordia now, but even with the storm past, the snow was deep and the temperature deadly. She would need supplies, proper winter gear, things she did not have. And even if she made it to town, what awaited her there? A small settlement with limited opportunities where she would be a stranger with no references, no connections. "I would need my own space," Victoria said slowly. "Some privacy. I could partition off a section of the cabin, build you a separate sleeping area. It would not be fancy, but it would be yours. And you swear this is only a business arrangement. You have my word. I will not take advantage of your situation, Victoria. I am offering honest work for honest pay, nothing more." She searched his face again with that penetrating gaze, and again she must have found what she was looking for because she extended her hand. "Then I accept your offer, Mr. Vaughn." He took her hand, feeling how small it was in his, how delicate the bones, yet there was strength there too. The handshake of someone who had learned to endure. "Call me Rhett," he said. "If we are to be living under the same roof, we can dispense with formalities." "Then you should call me Victoria." Over the following days, they fell into a routine. Rhett worked on building a partition wall, splitting his cabin into 2 distinct spaces. It was rough work, but honest, and he found himself whistling while he labored, surprising himself. It had been a long time since he had felt anything approaching cheerfulness. Victoria proved herself capable from the start. Despite her ordeal, she threw herself into work with a determination that he admired. She took over all the cooking, and he discovered that she had a talent for making even simple ingredients taste remarkable. The cabin took on a different feel with her in it, more like a home than just a shelter. She cleaned and organized, mended his clothes and his worn linens, found places for things he had never thought to organize. But it was more than just the domestic improvements. It was her presence itself, the sound of her humming while she worked, the way she smiled when something turned out well. The conversations they had in the evenings, sitting on opposite sides of the fire, talking about anything and everything. She was well read, he discovered, educated beyond what he would have expected. Her father had been a teacher back in Pennsylvania before moving west, and he had instilled in her a love of books and learning. "I miss it," she confessed one night. "Having access to books. My uncle considered reading a waste of time. He burned my mother's books when I arrived, said they took up space better used for practical things." The casual cruelty of it made Rhett angry all over again. "I have a few books," he said. "They were my father's. You are welcome to read them." Her eyes lit up with genuine joy. "Truly." "Of course. They are just gathering dust." She read voraciously after that, often by firelight in the evenings. Rhett found himself watching her sometimes, the way the flames painted gold onto her features, the small smile that played at her lips when she read something that pleased her. He was beginning to realize that having Victoria in his home was becoming less about the practical help and more about something he could not quite name yet. Winter deepened. The snow kept coming, storm after storm, each one adding to the already staggering accumulation. They were truly isolated now, the road to Concordia completely impassable. Rhett checked on his cattle daily, the small herd he kept in the sheltered valley behind his property. He hauled hay to them through waist-deep drifts, broke ice off their water, counted them obsessively to make sure none had wandered off or succumbed to the cold. Victoria worried about him during these excursions. He could see it in her face when he returned, the relief that flooded her features when he stomped the snow off his boots and came back inside. "You are going to catch your death out there," she scolded one particularly bitter day, helping him out of his frost-covered coat. "The temperature must be below zero." "The cattle need tending," he replied, teeth chattering. "They would die without it." She had heated water waiting, and she poured it into a basin, then pulled his hands into the warmth. The sensation was almost painful, the blood rushing back into his frozen fingers. She held his hands in the water, her smaller hands cupping his, and the gesture felt almost unbearably intimate. "You are too reckless," she said, but her voice was gentle. "I do what needs doing." "Yes, and one day you will do what needs doing and not come back." She looked up at him, and he saw genuine fear in her eyes. What would I do then? The question hung between them, heavier than it should have been. What would she do? The practical answer was that she would take one of his horses and make for Concordia as soon as the weather allowed, but they both knew that was not what she was really asking. "I will always come back," he said quietly. It was a promise he had no business making, but he meant it with every fiber of his being. February arrived with a false thaw, a few days where the temperature rose above freezing, and the snow began to melt, creating treacherous rivers of slush. Then the cold returned with vengeance, freezing everything solid and making the world a skating rink. It was during this deep freeze that Victoria fell sick. Rhett woke one morning to find her still in bed, which was unusual. She was always up before him, starting breakfast. "Victoria." He approached her sleeping area, calling through the partition. "Are you well?" "I am fine," came the reply, but her voice was weak, thready. He pushed aside the curtain she had hung for privacy, propriety forgotten in his concern. She was huddled under her blankets, shivering despite the fire, her face flushed with fever. "You are not fine," he said, coming to kneel beside her bed. He placed his hand on her forehead and felt the heat radiating from her skin. "You are burning up." "It is just a chill," she protested. "I will be better soon." But she was not better. The fever worsened throughout the day. Rhett tried everything he knew, all the remedies his father had taught him. He made willow bark tea to bring down the fever, kept cold compresses on her forehead, forced her to drink water even when she did not want to. Nothing seemed to help. By nightfall, she was delirious, tossing and turning, calling out for her mother in a voice that broke his heart. He stayed by her side, replacing the compress, speaking to her in low, soothing tones even when he was sure she could not hear him. "You cannot give up," he told her in the darkest hours of the night, when her breathing had become shallow and labored. "Do you hear me, Victoria? You survived that blizzard. You survived your uncle's cruelty. You are stronger than this fever. You have to fight." He took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers, holding on as if he could physically tether her to life through will alone. "I need you to stay," he whispered, and the admission cost him something. "Please stay." He must have dozed off in his chair because he woke to sunlight streaming through the window and a hand touching his face. He jerked awake to find Victoria looking at him, her eyes clear for the first time in days, the fever finally broken. "You stayed with me," she said softly. "Of course I stayed." His voice was rough with exhaustion and relief. "Did you think I would leave you alone? I dreamed," she said. "I dreamed I was back in the snow, freezing again. But then I heard your voice, and it led me back. You saved me again." Something shifted between them in that moment, an acknowledgement of what had been building for weeks now. They were not just housemates anymore, not just employer and employee. They had become something more, though neither was quite ready to name it yet. Victoria recovered slowly over the following week, and Rhett found himself reluctant to leave her side. He did only the most essential chores, spending the rest of his time in the cabin, ostensibly to make sure she did not overexert herself, but really just to be near her. They talked more during her recovery, sharing stories from their pasts. He told her about his childhood, growing up on this harsh land, learning to ride and shoot and survive. She told him about Pennsylvania, about gaslight streets and proper schools, about the culture shock of moving west. "Did you like it here?" he asked. "Before your parents died, I mean." She considered the question. "I think I could have. The land is beautiful in its own way, wild and honest, but everything changed when fever took them. After that, it was just survival. And now, she smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. "Now I think I might be starting to like it again." March came in like a lion, with more snow and bitter wind, but there was a promise in the air now, a sense that winter was finally losing its grip. The days grew longer, the sun stronger. Icicles that hung from the cabin's eaves dripped throughout the afternoon, creating a constant musical patter. Rhett began planning for spring, for planting and calving season. He discussed his plans with Victoria over dinner, asking her opinion, valuing her input. She was smart, he had learned, with good instincts about things. She suggested crops he had not considered, ways to improve his irrigation from the creek, small efficiencies that made perfect sense once she pointed them out. "You have a head for this," he told her one evening. "For ranching." "I am just applying common sense," she replied, but he could tell she was pleased. "It is more than that. You understand how things work together, how to make the most of limited resources." He leaned forward, elbows on the table. You could be a real partner in this place, Victoria. Not just hired help, but a true partner. She looked at him, something vulnerable and hopeful flickering across her face. What exactly are you saying? This was the moment. He could feel it, the precipice he had been approaching for weeks now without fully acknowledging it. He could step back, make his words about business, keep things safe and undefined. Or he could step forward into uncertainty and truth. I am saying that somewhere between pulling you out of the snow and nursing you through that fever, everything changed for me. The words came easier than he expected, like they had been waiting to be spoken all along. I am saying that this cabin feels empty when you are not in it, that I find myself thinking about you during every moment we are apart. I am saying that I do not want you to be just hired help or even just a partner in the ranch. I want more than that if you do. Victoria had gone very still, her eyes locked on his face. Rhett, she began, and he could hear the caution in her voice. We barely know each other. I know you survived things that would have broken most people. I know you are brave and strong and kind. I know that you hum when you cook and that you cry when you read sad passages in books, even though you try to hide it. I know that I have never felt about anyone the way I feel about you. And how do you feel about me? It was a fair question, and it deserved an honest answer. He stood and came around the table, then dropped to one knee in front of her chair, taking her hands in his. I love you, Victoria Thornton. I think I started loving you the moment I picked you up out of that snow and carried you inside, and I have not stopped since. I know this is fast. I know we have only known each other a few months, but out here, time moves differently. We have lived a lifetime together in this cabin, just the two of us against the winter. That has to count for something. Tears were sliding down her cheeks now, but she was smiling. I love you too, she whispered. I think I have for weeks, but I was afraid to admit it, afraid it would all disappear like a dream if I spoke it aloud. It is not a dream, he promised. This is real. What I feel for you is the most real thing I have ever known. He kissed her then, his hands coming up to cup her face, his thumbs brushing away her tears. She kissed him back with a sweetness that undid him, her fingers tangling in his hair. It was a first kiss and a promise all at once, the sealing of something that had been building between them since that first night. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Rhett rested his forehead against hers. Marry me, he said. Make this official. Be my wife, my partner in everything. Yes, Victoria said without hesitation. Yes, I will marry you. They married in April, as soon as the roads cleared enough to reach Concordia. It was a simple ceremony in the small church, witnessed by the minister and his wife. Victoria wore a new dress that Rhett had bought for her, pale blue fabric that matched her eyes, and she had never looked more beautiful. He wore his best clothes, which were still rough frontier wear, but she did not seem to mind. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Rhett pulled Victoria close and kissed her with all the pent-up emotion of the past months. The minister's wife dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief, moved by the obvious love between them. They spent one night in Concordia's small boarding house, a luxury that felt almost decadent after months in the cabin. Rhett had reserved the nicest room available, wanting to give Victoria something special. It had a real bed with a feather mattress, curtains on the windows, even a vase with early spring flowers. But it was not the room that made the night special. It was the way they came together, the careful tenderness mixed with passion, the sense of finally being truly united. Victoria was shy at first, admitting she had no experience, but Rhett took his time, making sure she felt safe and cherished. By the time dawn crept through the curtains, they were thoroughly married in every sense, curled together under the quilts, Victoria's head on his chest, his arms wrapped around her. "I never imagined I could be this happy," she murmured against his skin. "After everything that happened, I thought my life would just be about surviving. But it feels like actually living. We are going to have a good life," Rhett promised her. "I will make sure of it." They returned to the ranch the next day, but it felt different now. This was their home, not just his. They were building something together, a true partnership. Spring unfolded around them with dramatic speed, the land transforming from white to brown to green in what felt like days. Wildflowers exploded across the prairie, painting the landscape in impossible colors. The cattle thrived, several cows giving birth to healthy calves that staggered around on wobbly legs. Victoria threw herself into ranch life with enthusiasm. She learned to milk the cow Rhett had acquired, candled eggs from their small flock of chickens, even learned to ride the gentler of his 2 horses. She worked alongside him in the garden they planted together, both of them on their knees in the dark soil, placing seeds with care and hope. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch Rhett built that spring, watching the sun set over their land, holding hands, talking about their plans. They wanted to expand the herd, build a proper barn, maybe add rooms to the cabin when children came. The word filled Rhett with a strange mix of terror and joy. He had been alone for so long that the idea of a family, of tiny humans dependent on him, seemed impossible. But when he looked at Victoria, saw the way her hand sometimes drifted to her flat stomach as if imagining what might be, he wanted it desperately. Summer came with its own challenges. A dry spell threatened their crops, and Rhett spent long days hauling water from the creek, trying to save what they had planted. Victoria worked beside him, both of them exhausted by nightfall, but there was satisfaction in the labor, in fighting together for what they had built. It was during this time that her uncle appeared. Rhett was in the fields when he heard Victoria scream. He ran faster than he had ever run before, his heart in his throat, expecting to find her injured or worse. Instead, he found her backing away from a man on horseback, a big, bearded man with mean eyes who could only be her uncle. "Get away from her," Rhett said, placing himself between Victoria and the man, his hand on his pistol. "This does not concern you, stranger," her uncle growled. "The girl is family. She ran away and I have come to bring her home." "I am not going anywhere with you," Victoria said, her voice shaking but firm. "I am married now. This is my home." "Married." Her uncle spat the word like a curse. "To this dirt farmer, you could have done better." "I had arrangements with the Hendersons. Their oldest boy was willing to take you despite your willful nature." "You mean you were trying to sell me?" Victoria shot back. "Like livestock." Rhett's hand tightened on his gun. "You need to leave. Now, Victoria is my wife and she is staying here. If you come onto my land again, I will treat you as the threat you are." For a moment, he thought her uncle might actually draw on him. The older man's hand moved toward his own weapon, and Rhett prepared for violence. But something in his expression must have convinced the uncle that he was serious, that he would indeed shoot if necessary. "You are making a mistake, girl," her uncle said, looking past Rhett to Victoria. "This place will fail like most of them do, and then where will you be? You will come crawling back, and I will not be so forgiving." "I would die before I came back to you," Victoria said quietly. "You were supposed to be family, but you treated me worse than an animal. Whatever happens here, it will be better than what I had with you." Her uncle wheeled his horse around and rode off, but not before throwing one last venomous look back at them. Rhett watched until he disappeared over the rise, making sure he was truly gone before holstering his weapon and turning to Victoria. She was shaking, adrenaline and old fear coursing through her. He pulled her into his arms, holding her tight while she trembled against him. "He cannot hurt you anymore," Rhett said into her hair. I will never let him hurt you again." "I know," she whispered. "I know." But seeing him again, hearing his voice, it brought everything back. He is gone now, and if he is foolish enough to return, he will regret it. They stood there for a long time, holding each other in the middle of the field, the sun beating down on them, the wind carrying the scent of growing things. When Victoria finally pulled back, her eyes were dry and there was steel in her expression. "Let us get back to work," she said. "We have crops to save." Rhett loved her even more in that moment for her resilience, for her refusal to let the past defeat her. They worked until dark, hauling water bucket by bucket, and they saved most of the garden. Late summer brought better rains and their crops flourished. They harvested vegetables in abundance, more than they could eat, so Victoria learned to can and preserve, filling shelves with jars that glowed like jewels. Rhett took the excess to Concordia and sold it, returning with supplies and money that he immediately gave to Victoria. "This is yours," he said, pressing the bills into her hand. "You grew it, you preserved it. The money is yours to do with as you please." She looked at the money like it was something foreign. "I have never had my own money before. My uncle took everything I earned." "Well, this is yours. Buy something for yourself, something you want." She did, returning from her next trip to town with books, a whole stack of them. Her face glowed with excitement as she showed them to Rhett, explaining what each one was about, why she had chosen it. He would have given her all the money in Kansas just to see her look like that. Fall came with its spectacular display. The cottonwoods along the creek turning gold, the prairie grasses going bronze and amber. They prepared for winter, stocking firewood, preserving meat, making sure the cabin was sealed against the cold to come. This time, they would face winter together, prepared and unafraid. It was in October that Victoria told him. They were sitting by the fire after dinner, and she had been quiet all evening, a small smile playing at her lips like she had a secret. "What is on your mind?" Rhett finally asked. "You have been looking like the cat that caught the canary all night." She took his hand and placed it on her stomach, looking up at him with shining eyes. "We are going to have a baby," she said. "In the spring, around April or May." For a moment, Rhett could not process the words. Then joy exploded through him so fierce it almost hurt. "A baby," he repeated stupidly. "We are going to have a baby." "Yes," she laughed. "Are you happy?" He pulled her into his arms, holding her carefully now, aware of the precious life she carried. "Happy does not begin to cover it," he said roughly. "Victoria, you have given me everything. A home, a purpose, love. And now this. I do not have words for what I feel." They planned and dreamed through the winter, making preparations for the new life that would join them. Rhett built a cradle from oak, sanding it until the wood was satin smooth, carving their initials and the baby's expected birth date into the headboard. Victoria sewed tiny clothes, knitted blankets, her hands constantly busy creating things for their child. This winter was gentler than the last, or perhaps it just felt that way because they faced it together, with hope for the future warming them more than any fire could. They still had storms, still had days when they could not leave the cabin, but those days were spent talking, planning, dreaming aloud about who their child would become. "You want a boy or a girl?" Victoria asked one snowy evening, her hand resting on her growing belly. "I do not care," Rhett said honestly. "As long as the baby is healthy and you come through the birth safely, nothing else matters." "I think it is a boy," she said. "I do not know why, but I feel it." She was right. In late April, after a labor that scared Rhett half to death with its length and Victoria's pain, their son was born. The midwife from Concordia had come to stay with them 2 weeks before, and her presence was the only thing that kept Rhett from complete panic, as he listened to Victoria's cries from the other side of the partition. When he finally heard the baby's first wail, he nearly collapsed with relief. The midwife called him in, and he found Victoria exhausted but smiling, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in one of the blankets she had knitted. "Meet your son," she said softly. Rhett approached on shaking legs and looked down at the baby. He was red-faced and wrinkled, with a surprisingly full head of dark hair and eyes that seemed to look right at him. "He is perfect," Rhett breathed. "You are perfect, both of you." They named him Robert after Rhett's father, with Thomas as a middle name after Victoria's father. Little Robert proved to have healthy lungs and a healthy appetite, keeping them both busy through the early days. Rhett discovered that he was surprisingly comfortable with fatherhood. He changed diapers without complaint, walked the floor with his son when he was fussy, sang off key lullabies that somehow soothed the baby to sleep. Victoria watched him with their son and felt her heart expand until she thought it might burst. This was what she had never dared dream of during those dark months at her uncle's house. Not just survival, but a real life. A man who loved her, a child, a home they had built together. "What are you thinking?" Rhett asked one night, catching her watching him as he rocked Robert. "That I am the luckiest woman alive," she said simply. "That everything I went through, all the pain and fear, it led me here, to you, to this." He smiled at her over their son's head. "I am the lucky one. The day you collapsed at my gate was the day my real life began." Robert grew quickly, as babies do, from a helpless newborn to a chubby infant who smiled and cooed, then to a curious crawler getting into everything. The cabin rang with his laughter, with the sounds of life and family. They expanded the ranch bit by bit. Rhett added rooms to the cabin, building a proper bedroom for them and a nursery for Robert, then a bigger kitchen that Victoria had designed. They increased their herd, built the barn they had dreamed of, planted an orchard of apple trees that would take years to bear fruit, but felt like an investment in their future. Neighbors began to settle closer, as Kansas became more populated. Some were good people who became friends, helping with harvests and barn raisings, sharing in celebrations. Others were less friendly, but Rhett and Victoria had each other, and that made them strong enough to handle anything. When Robert was 2, Victoria got pregnant again. This time it was a girl, born on a warm July evening with far less drama than her brother's arrival. They named her Caroline, and she looked just like Victoria, with the same violet eyes and determined little chin. "Our family is complete," Rhett said, holding his daughter while his son climbed all over him. "A son and a daughter. What more could we ask for? But life had more to give them." 2 years later came another boy, James, quieter than his older siblings but with a will of iron once he decided he wanted something. And 3 years after that, another girl, Margaret, who proved to be the wild one, fearless in a way that gave them both gray hairs. Through it all, through the chaos of raising 4 children on a working ranch, Rhett and Victoria's love never faltered. If anything, it grew stronger, deepened by shared trials and joys. They still made time for each other, still sat on their porch in the evenings when the children were asleep, holding hands and talking like they had in those early days. "You ever regret it?" Rhett asked one night, when the stars were so bright they seemed close enough to touch. "The life you could have had if you had made it to town that day, if I had not found you." Victoria squeezed his hand, looking at him with those eyes he still found as captivating as the first time he had seen them open. Not for a single second. "Everything I have, everything I am, is because you carried me inside that day and never let go. You saved my life in more ways than one. You gave me a reason to live, not just survive. You did the same for me," he said. "I did not realize how empty my life was until you filled it." "We saved each other then," she said with a smile. "That seems fair." The years rolled on, marked by seasons and harvests, by children growing and the ranch prospering. There were hard times, drought years and storms, illness and injury, but they faced everything together. The love that had begun in desperation and cold had matured into something unbreakable, the foundation of everything they built. Robert grew into a fine young man, tall like his father, with his mother's keen mind. He took to ranching naturally, working alongside Rhett, until people began to refer to them as the Vaughn men, a team. Caroline became a teacher, opening a small school in Concordia, her gift for learning passed down from both her grandfathers. James discovered a talent for working with wood, becoming a furniture maker whose pieces were sought after across Kansas. And Margaret, true to her wild nature, married a surveyor and went west to Oregon, writing long letters home about her adventures. The children's marriages brought grandchildren, a whole new generation filling the ranch house with noise and laughter. Rhett and Victoria became the heart of a growing family, the couple everyone looked to for wisdom and guidance. On their 25th wedding anniversary, their children threw them a celebration. The whole family gathered, children and grandchildren, and several of the neighbors who had become dear friends over the years. There was music and dancing, more food than anyone could eat, speeches and toasts that went on for hours. Late in the evening, Rhett pulled Victoria away from the party, leading her out to the old porch, the one they had sat on countless times over the years. The original cabin was still standing, though it was now attached to the much larger house, preserved as a reminder of where they had started. "Look at what we built," Rhett said, gesturing to the gathered family visible through the windows, the prosperous ranch stretching out around them. "All of this started with me carrying a frozen woman through the snow." "Best thing I ever did, fainting at your gate," Victoria teased, leaning into his side. They were both older now, gray threading through their hair, lines on their faces marking years of laughter and worry. But when Rhett looked at her, he still saw the beautiful woman he had fallen in love with, still felt his heart quicken the same way it had all those years ago. "Best thing I ever did was seeing you there," he replied, "and deciding in that moment that you were mine to protect." "I was never yours," Victoria corrected gently. "We were always each other's, partners from that first day, even if it took us a while to realize it." "You are right," he agreed. "Partners. In everything, I love you, Victoria Vaughn, just as much today as I did that day I asked you to marry me. More even." "I love you too," she said. "Always." They kissed, soft and sweet, a kiss that held 25 years of marriage, of shared dreams and weathered storms. When they broke apart, they stood together watching the sun set over their land, the land they had built together through love and sheer determination. Inside, the party continued, their family celebrating the love that had created them all. But out on the porch, Rhett and Victoria stood in quiet contentment, wrapped in each other's arms, grateful for the chance meeting in the snow that had changed everything, grateful for every day since, grateful for the life they had built together against all odds. Years continued to pass, the rhythm of life on the ranch flowing like the seasons themselves. Rhett and Victoria aged gracefully together, their children taking over more of the work as they slowed down. But they never stopped being partners, never stopped being the center that held their family together. Robert and his wife took over running the ranch, expanding it further than Rhett had ever dreamed possible. They added more cattle, bred horses that became known throughout Kansas for their quality. Caroline's school grew into a proper schoolhouse with 3 teachers, educating children from miles around. James's workshop produced pieces that were shipped as far east as Chicago. and Margaret's letters from Oregon told of a growing family and a life full of adventure. The grandchildren grew, some staying in Kansas, some venturing out to make their own way in a changing world. The century turned, 1899 becoming 1900, bringing with it new technologies and new possibilities. Rhett watched the changes with interest, adapting where it made sense, holding firm to the values that had brought him and Victoria through so much. They celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary surrounded by so many descendants they could barely keep count. 4 children, 12 grandchildren, and 3 great-grandchildren, with more on the way. The ranch house had expanded to accommodate family gatherings, and still it felt full to bursting during these celebrations. 50 years, Victoria marveled that night, after everyone had finally gone home or to bed. They sat in their bedroom, the one Rhett had built for them all those years ago, holding hands like always. "Half a century since you pulled me out of the snow." "Best decision I ever made," Rhett said, his voice rougher with age but no less sincere. "Every day with you has been a gift, even the hard ones, especially the hard ones. Those were when we proved what we were made of, when we showed that our love was stronger than anything life could throw at us." She leaned her head on his shoulder, comfortable in the silence that came from decades of companionship. They did not need words anymore to communicate. A look, a touch, these were enough. Rhett went peacefully in his sleep one night in February of 1902, 77 years old and surrounded by the evidence of a life well lived. Victoria woke to find him still beside her, his face peaceful, his hand still holding hers even in death. She did not cry, not right away. Instead, she sat with him as dawn broke, talking to him one last time, thanking him for 53 years of love, telling him she would see him again. The funeral was the largest Concordia had ever seen. People came from miles around to pay respects to the man who had built one of the most successful ranches in Kansas, who had raised fine children and been a pillar of the community. But for Victoria, the loss was far more personal. She had lost her partner, her great love, the man who had saved her life and then made that life worth living. She remained on the ranch, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, who made sure she was never alone. But there was a hollowness now, an absence that nothing could fill. For 53 years, Rhett had been her constant companion. Life without him felt incomplete, like a book with the last chapters torn out. Victoria spent her remaining days in the cabin where it had all begun, the original structure that Rhett had preserved all those years. She would sit by the fire, in the chair that had been his, and remember. Remember the day he carried her inside. Remember the first time he told her he loved her. Remember every sunrise they had watched together, every trial they had overcome, every moment of joy they had shared. She passed quietly in her sleep 8 months later, on a crisp October morning when the cottonwoods were gold and the air smelled of autumn. Her children found her in the old cabin, a smile on her face, her hand outstretched as if reaching for someone only she could see. They buried her next to Rhett on a hill overlooking the ranch, under an oak tree they had planted together 50 years earlier. The stone read simply, Rhett Vaughn, 1825–1902, Victoria Vaughn, 1853, 1902, partners in life. Together in eternity, the ranch continued, passed down through generations, each one adding to the legacy that Rhett and Victoria had begun. The story of how they met became family legend, told and retold to children and grandchildren. The tale of a woman who collapsed in the snow and a cowboy who carried her inside and built a life with her that spanned more than half a century. The cabin remained standing for decades, eventually turned into a small museum by their descendants, preserving the place where it all began. Visitors would come to see where the great love story had unfolded, to stand in the room where Rhett had nursed Victoria back to health, to imagine the life they had built together against all odds. But the real legacy was not in the buildings or the land, impressive as they were. The real legacy was in the family they created, in the values they instilled, in the proof that love, true love, could not only survive but thrive even in the harshest conditions. They had shown that sometimes the worst moments of our lives lead directly to the best, that salvation can come when we least expect it, that two people who choose each other every single day can build something that lasts not just a lifetime, but for generations. Their descendants spread across America, carrying forward the story of Rhett and Victoria, the cowboy and the woman he found frozen at his gate, the man who carried her inside and never let go, the woman who gave him a reason to live beyond just surviving. It became a touchstone, a reminder that love was worth fighting for, worth building a life around, worth everything. And on cold winter nights, when the snow fell thick over the Kansas prairie, those who knew the story would look out at the white landscape and remember a young woman stumbling through a blizzard toward an unknown fate, and a man who chose to save her, to love her, to make her his partner in everything. They would remember that from that single act of compassion had grown a family, a legacy, a love story for the ages. The ranch itself remained in the family for more than 100 years, each generation stewarding it carefully, aware that they were guardians of something more than just land. They were guardians of a love story, of proof that the human heart is capable of remarkable things when given the chance. Eventually, on anniversaries and family reunions, they would gather at the graves on the hill, bringing flowers, bringing children to hear the story once more. And every time, the story had the same power, the same ability to move hearts and inspire hope. Because it was not just a story about survival, though survival was part of it. It was not just a story about love, though love was at its center. It was a story about two people who found each other when they needed it most, who built something beautiful from desperate circumstances, who proved that sometimes the darkest moments lead directly to the light. Rhett and Victoria Vaughn had lived and loved and left behind something that would endure long after they were gone. They had shown that a single act of kindness, a single moment of compassion, could change not just two lives but generations of lives. They had proven that love, real love, was worth every risk, every sacrifice, every moment of uncertainty. And in the end, that was the truest legacy of all, not the land or the buildings or even the family they created, but the simple, powerful truth that love endures, that it transcends death and time and memory, that somewhere, somehow, Rhett and Victoria were still together, still partners, still holding hands as they had for 53 years, watching over the family they had built, the legacy they had created, the love they had proven could survive anything. The sun set over the Kansas prairie, painting the sky in shades of gold and red, the same colors that had greeted countless sunsets during their life together. The wind whispered through the grass, carrying with it the echoes of laughter and love, of hard work and harder times overcome together, of two souls who had found each other in the snow and never let go. And the story lived on,